Good morning. I'm so honored to be part of this session and so full of regret that I'm not there in person. I'd like to begin with an autobiographical note. Many years ago, after directing a modest excavation project staffed by Buffalo Museum of Science personnel, I found myself to be the museum's curator of anthropology without having had any previous museum experience. You will appreciate that as an archaeologist, I was unfamiliar with unbroken objects, so I undertook my first task as curator, reorganizing the collections following an HVAC upgrade with a great deal of trepidation and deliberation. This was when I first came across the so-called missionary box or Pilgrim Box. Since then, I've thought on and off about the Pilgrim Box. As I've been thinking about its life cycle, it has become a part of mine. So today I present a story in 3 chapters, an object biography with autobiographical notes. Chapter 1. In 1868, Presbyterian minister William Alling traveled from Rochester, New York to the Holy Land, by which I mean in 19th century parlance, any part of the Middle East that could be connected with the Bible. While there, he acquired some 28 objects which were placed together in a wooden box. Alling, or someone, constructed context for the items by matching nearly every object to a passage from the Bible and transcribing these texts in a paper journal. Alling was part of a wave of later 19th century Holy Land travelers. A member of the Western Agency of the American Home Missionary Society, Alling made his trip to the Holy Land in the generation following the Second Great Awakening, a Protestant religious revival movement that had been so influential in Alling's hometown that the entire region became known as the Burned Over District, burning with religious fervor. Many who traveled to the Holy Land at this time sought to observe unchanged biblical lifeways, while also trying to change those very ways of life. Alling himself supported an evangelical school in Beirut, whose stated purpose was to convert the local Muslims, Jews, and Greek Orthodox to Protestant Christianity. And here you see a map from Alling's paper journal. For some, sanctified travel to the Holy Land signified a type of ownership. The Holy Land was interpreted in light of American nationalism and the concept of the US as the New Jerusalem. These elements, religious zeal coupled with its American nationalist equivalent, found expression in Holy Land mania. Alling was one of many pilgrim tourists who were intent on bringing the Holy Land back to those left behind. Pressed flowers, travel narratives, illustrated maps, stereoscopic images, drawings, photographs, and even Holy Land gardens and parks became popular ways for Americans to immerse themselves in a Holy Land experience once removed. While there is a fairly robust literature about these transposed pilgrimages, little has been written about the related phenomenon of Holy Land object collections, which provided 19th century Americans with tangible collections to the Holy Land. In his 1872 book, Freemasonry in the Holy Land, Robert Morris detailed his efforts to raise money for his trip to the Holy Land by selling subscriptions for Holy Land cabinets, really boxes, which would come stocked with 150 objects. Thanks to the donations of over 3,700 Masonic brethren, Morris acquired $10,000 to fund his excursion. Those who gave $10, approximately $185 today, shall be supplied with 150 objects from the Holy Land, detailed as you see on this slide, with fewer items for those who donated less. Alling's approach was different, but the box of items he put together was similar. Alling's plain wooden box contained both natural and cultural objects. These mundane items could be metanomically connected to biblical contexts through text. Scriptural parables attributed meaning to objects, while also transforming a collection, a constellation of individual artifacts into a themed collection, made cohesive and quasi-sacred by their enclosure in a reliquary-like box and by their linkage to biblical verses, which are listed in a paper journal. Today, I'll talk about 3 objects: 1, the cedar cone, 2, the bottle of water, and 3, the inkwell. First, the cedar cone. In the paper journal, the cedar cone is named Cedar Cone from the Cedars of Lebanon, associated with a variety of scriptural passages, including Psalm 104:16, the trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon, which he hath planted, and 1 Kings 6, which includes a description of Solomon using timber to build the temple. In Alling's day, nature and geography in the Holy Land were considered unchanging and timeless. So the cedar cone offers time travel to that biblical time and place. The cone carries the seeds of its own reproduction, so also represents the future. In biblical plant hermeneutics, seed bearing and regeneration are common tropes. The cone connects the biblical past to Alling's 19th century America and to future generations by presenting evidence that can be perceived by the senses, sight, touch, and smell. The cone would have been simultaneously commonplace and exotic, more resinous and fragrant than homegrown pine cones, creating continuity between the biblical past and the 19th century present, inviting people to consider their affinities with biblical predecessors and between the Holy Land and upstate New York. Second, the bottle of water. The water is in a long-necked bottle with a pasted paper label and ink inscription. In the paper journal, the Jordan water is linked to 2 Kings 5:10, in which the prophet Elisha sends a messenger telling the military commander Naaman, quote, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed," end quote, thus curing his skin disease. The belief in the power of Jordan water has continued through the generation. The journal includes an undated note added in light penciling, Connie and Jane baptized with. According to Christian belief, the Jordan River was the place where Jesus was baptized by St. John. The water remains vibrant, to use Jane Bennett's term. Third, the scribe's inkwell and penholder. This artifact, named Arab inkhorn, is the first object listed in the paper journal, paired with 3 verses from Ezekiel. The story is about 6 men, interpreted as angels, entering Jerusalem, 5 equipped with weapons, and 1 with a writer's inkhorn. The man angel with the inkhorn was meant to mark people of virtue, those who were not caught up in the worship of idols, lewd behavior, or guilty of other transgressions. Those individuals were saved from slaughter. Elling would have been familiar with inkhorns, also called penners, that is, portable inkwells made of horn. These objects were to carry ink, pen nibs, and sand or ash to be used as blotting powder. The brass example would have been both familiar and foreign, since its purpose would have been understood, but its form and material might have seemed unusual. The object may have fostered a sense of timelessness, connecting a contemporary writer's toolkit to one used by an angel in Ezekiel. The story of brutal divine judgment in Ezekiel might have resonated more broadly, since to some pilgrim travelers, the degraded state of the 19th century Holy Land confirmed prophecies of destruction and provided evidence of divine judgment. Autobiographical Note 2. These days, I find myself at an unlikely place, the Graduate Theological Union, or GTU, in Berkeley, California, an institution that grants academic MAs and PhDs in theological and religious studies. While my real job is director of the Center for the Arts and Religion, I'm heading toward an eagerly anticipated end of an interim gig as Dean and VP for Academic Affairs. For a long time, I didn't see how my own archaeological ways of thinking intersected with those of GTU students and colleagues. But my dormant study of the Buffalo Museum of Science missionary box reintroduced itself to me and showed me how my thinking about material culture is relevant and in fact occasionally even crucial for GTU students. Sometimes it seems that the box and I are fellow actants networked together. Chapter 2. The Pilgrim Box was assembled in service to Elling's missionary cause and easily segued into use for Protestant religious education. Evidence from new discoveries in Holy Land archaeology and cartography became known as the fifth gospel. Holy Land souvenirs became parabiblical materials, providing evidence to affirm the Bible, popularized through the Palestine or Holy Class movement, which included weekday classes that relied on the authenticity of Holy Land geography. The objects themselves might be quite ordinary in their original contexts, but when reinserted into a new context, the objects became sacralized. The very act of transporting the objects from the Holy Land to upstate New York made the objects extraordinary and meaningful. By the turn of the 20th century, the concept of the fifth gospel was critiqued for dominating biblical interpretation at the expense of other sources. An elaborate Jerusalem exhibition at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair brought disappointing attendance figures, marking the diminishment of this trend. Elling's collection may well have continued in use in Rochester Sunday schools, but it took on a new role as a family heirloom. Chapter 3. One of these family caretakers was Elling's great-granddaughter, Ruth Weaver, who in 1998 donated the missionary box, along with an associated collection of documents, to the Buffalo Museum of Science. In this new life, the missionary box became BMS C30144.01. It was labeled, entered into the database, and carefully placed in storage. Autobiographical Note 3. In 2004, I left the museum to become Director of Art Conservation at Buffalo State College, but I continued to muse about the missionary box. I suggested that a student conduct a conservation research and treatment project on the missionary box, and student Rebecca Cashman, now objects conservator at History Nebraska's Ford Conservation Center, took on the challenge. Cashman's report describes her research, including an interview with Ruth Weaver, and a thorough description of the objects, the special focus on the items she chose for conservation treatment. In 2013, the Buffalo Museum of Science conducted a redesign of the large display cases in the museum's expansive atrium, exhibiting items from across curatorial divisions. The atrium cases are considered a permanent display, remaining in place for a long period of time. The 2013 remix includes both crowd favorites and collections that had not been exhibited before or had not been on display for a very long time. This marked the Pilgrim Box's first move from storage to exhibition. In conclusion, the Pilgrim Box has had many lives so far, and we don't even know them all. For example, what did today's museum visitors think about the box and its contents? How does it fare as a featured museum objects, along with hometown hero Eddie the chimpanzee and a neighboring vitrine? Each stage, examined in its own cultural and historical context, illuminates a past that is not entirely past, an object in motion, per Apatorai. And I would note that these categories overlap and reverberate one with the other. 1, object stories and accompanying texts. 2, missionary fundraising. 3, Sunday school teaching. 4, family heirloom. 5, museum collection. 6, art conservation project. 7, museum exhibition. 8, research project. 9, this talk, which itself is really an aid memoir for thinking about Mary. What I see is how my own story is interwoven here as well. This brings me to Autobiographical Note 4, which takes me back to Mary and 232 Bay Street Road in the mid-1980s. Context, interpretation, storytelling, small things unforgotten. How lucky I was. How lucky we all were. What a legacy we have. Thank you very much.